By the time my daughter called me emotionally unavailable for the third time, I had stopped trying to defend myself, not because she was entirely wrong, because somewhere over the years I had lost the ability to explain myself without sounding like an accountant arguing with grief. The therapist's office smelled faintly like tea and old paper, soft lamps, neutral furniture. The kind of room designed to absorb conflict without reacting to it. Hannah sat across from me with a notebook balanced on her knee. Prepared. That hurt more than anger would have. Dr. Elaine Mercer introduced herself calmly, then asked Hannah why she wanted the joint session. Hannah exhaled slowly, like she had rehearsed even that. "My mother doesn't know how to connect emotionally," she said. "She provides things. She solves problems, but she doesn't actually show up." Dr. Mercer nodded once. "Can you give an example?" I already knew she could. There are children who grow up collecting moments of affection. Mine had collected absences. "You missed my regional debate finals when I was 16. I was working. You didn't even call until the next morning. I remembered the night instantly. A double shift at the hospital after 2 nurses called out sick. Standing in a supply closet at midnight eating crackers because I hadn't had time for dinner. I had watched her trophy ceremony later through a grainy recording another parent uploaded online. I still remembered what color blazer she wore." Hannah continued. "When Dad left, you never talked about it. You just became functional. Functional." I almost smiled at the word, as if functionality were emotionally neutral instead of expensive. Dr. Mercer occasionally asked questions, but mostly she listened. Hannah described birthdays where I looked tired. Conversations where I responded with advice instead of comfort. The way I paid her graduate school rent, without ever asking how lonely she was living in another city. Some memories I wanted to challenge. Others I couldn't. Because perception hardens over time. Once someone decides what kind of love you offer, every memory begins organizing itself around that conclusion. "I always felt managed," Hannah said finally, "not loved." The sentence settled heavily into the room. Dr. Mercer turned toward me gently. "What is it like hearing that?" I looked down at my hands before answering. "Familiar." Hannah frowned slightly, like the answer irritated her. "You always do that," she said. "You stay calm instead of being honest." That almost made me laugh. Calm had been honesty for most of my adult life. After my husband left, panic became a luxury. There was rent, tuition, insurance deductibles, a leaking transmission, a child watching me constantly to determine whether the world was still safe. So I learned restraint, not because I felt little, because I felt too much. "I'm not saying you never sacrificed," Hannah continued. "I'm saying everything felt transactional, like responsibility instead of love." Dr. Mercer's expression shifted slightly then. Not judgment, recognition. Hannah leaned forward. "You paid for things, yes. But honestly, sometimes it felt more about control than care." Silence, a long one. Then Dr. Mercer spoke carefully. "Hannah, did you know your mother was your anonymous scholarship donor for the last 4 years?" The room went still so quickly it almost felt staged. Hannah blinked once. "What?" Dr. Mercer glanced toward me briefly before continuing. "The donor identity was supposed to remain confidential. I only became aware accidentally during a renewal review through the Graduate Hardship Foundation." Hannah looked at me directly for the first time in nearly an hour. "No," she said slowly. "That's not possible." I kept my eyes on the carpet. The truth was, I hadn't wanted this moment. Not because I was ashamed, because anonymous kindness is sometimes the only form people will accept without resentment. "There were tuition gaps after your second year," Dr. Mercer explained softly. "The scholarship covered them." Hannah's face changed in stages. Confusion first, then calculation, then something quieter and harder to name. "You paid for that?" she asked me. "Yes." "Why wouldn't you tell me?" I thought about answering quickly. Instead, I told the truth. "Because every time I tried helping openly, you heard obligation instead of love." Hannah stared at me. "I didn't want you to feel indebted," I continued, "and I didn't want another fight about independence." Dr. Mercer didn't interrupt, didn't rescue either of us, which I appreciated. Therapy, I realized then, was not about deciding who suffered correctly. It was about surviving long enough inside uncomfortable truths to recognize them fully. Hannah looked shaken now, but not transformed. Important difference. You still should have told me, she said finally, though without earlier certainty. Maybe, and you still weren't emotionally there. That one I accepted with a small nod, because providing safety is not always the same thing as providing closeness. Sometimes exhausted people confuse the two. The session ended quietly after that. No crying, no reconciliation speech. Just paperwork, careful voices, and the strange emotional fatigue that follows honesty arriving late. 3 weeks later, Hannah came to my house unexpectedly. She stood in the kitchen while I made coffee neither of us drank much of. Her eyes moved around differently than before. She noticed things: the ancient winter coat hanging near the back door, the folders stacked beside my desk labeled with tuition deadlines and insurance forms, the cracked handle on the mug I'd owned since her childhood because replacing functioning things always felt irresponsible. "You kept all this?" she asked softly. "Most parents do." "No," she said. "Not like this." We stood there without speaking for a while. Then she asked the question that finally reached somewhere fragile inside me. "Were you lonely?" I opened my mouth, closed it again, because loneliness had become so woven into adulthood that I no longer knew where it ended and personality began. Hannah stepped closer eventually and hugged me awkwardly, like someone trying to relearn a language they once rejected. I hugged her back carefully, not because the distance had disappeared, but because for the first time in years, neither of us seemed entirely certain we understood the past correctly. And somehow that felt more honest than certainty ever had.